Hello, everyone, and welcome to 9-Inch Charge. Welcome to the Old World Show. Today, it is my absolute great pleasure to be joined by Ben of the Two Ps podcast. Welcome, Ben.
All right, Dan, how you doing, bud?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Today, we're going to talk about your most favoritist faction ever, aren't we, Ben?
Yeah, here we are, Elves.
The High Elves.
I might giggle like a girl for the rest of this. I love it.
Yeah, I'm so pleased to have you on, mate, because of all the people that I know in the hobby, I know that for you, the High Elves have such a special place in what the hobby means to you. So, do you want to just give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and your love for the High Elves?
Sure. So I started Warhammer Fantasy with 4th edition, so the 4th edition box set, which was Elves and Goblins, which is probably a decent chunk of the reason why I like or end up liking Elves as much as I do. And then pretty much that's the only army I've ever played. I've collected all the others as they sort of came in starters boxes, so I ended up with some dwarves and some goblins and some orcs and some empire, some lizardmen and Bretonians, because they all came in the starters kit. But it was all about the elves. It was all about the elves.
What was it after you got the starter set and started to dive into this sort of this realm of the High Elves that made them really stick with you?
Well, I guess it's no mistake that they reminded me a lot of the elves from Lord of the Rings, and I just loved the elves from Lord of the Rings. I loved I think it's a really funny thing for a child to sort of attach to, but I love the idea of an immortal species, or effectively an immortal species, sacrificing themselves for like a noble or greater purpose. So Helm's Deep in the film for me was just like, yes. It's kind of largely comes from that, but also the artwork and the cleanliness of the army, the sort of clean lines, the discipline, I think, is something that I really liked as well. Like the perfectly uniformed ranks of spearmen. It's just great. And I think the other thing was I liked the way they fought. I liked the fact that they were like undisputedly the most skilled warriors in the whole of the old world. They might not have been the toughest or the strongest, but they were the most skilled. So I kind of like that. So
that's something that drew me to Elves as well. The first box of Warhammer that I ever owned was a High Elf box, and it was part spearman, part bowman. You could get them both inside of one box, and that was the first box that I had about 20 years ago. And the same sorts of things.
A spearman and an archer on one little tiny sprue.
And it's the same sort of thing that drew me to them, as you just said. It was their kind of nobility, and that they felt a bit like the goodies, I suppose, like the heroes. They could be the heroes of the old world. And then after that, I decided to go a little bit more chaotic good, I suppose, with the Wood Elves, and then I never looked back. But the very first thing I collected in the hobby was a box of High Elves, and I do have some of them actually still in my box of tricks. I've got some of the little spearmen and archers in there still. I know you have maybe more than just one or two in your box of tricks, Ben.
Well, it's a problem because I as much as I love them, I was never able to do them justice for a long time, until maybe I started working for Games Workshop. I was undercoating in black and dry brushing and doing all the stuff that you did back then when you started the hobby. Washes weren't a thing, really. I had flesh wash and armor wash, and that was it. And so they just looked dreadful. So I ended up just collecting them. Every time a new box came out, I'd buy them. And then 8th edition came out, and I decided that my units of sort of 10 and 20 should really be units of 30, because that's what all the pictures were of, and they look great. So I've got so many of them.
I can remember the day that they announced that they were going to get rid of a lot of the range, the Dragon Princes and things like that. And I think you were like my first call of the day. I was like straight on Messenger, and I was something like, Ben, you've got to like start scouring. And I think did you manage to get everything that you wanted just in time?
I did for the most part. Yeah, it was. It's probably my lowest moment with Games Workshop in the last 5 years. Just absolutely blindsided, and it's because a lot of those units, like the new plastic White Lions and the Sky Cutters, those things have been released when I was doing my junior doctor rotations in the hospital. I just didn't have any mind or brain space to even contemplate a hobby at that time. So I didn't get anything, didn't buy anything, and then of course you get back into the hobby and you're on the treadmill of new releases and Age of Sigmar, and it was always, I'll get some of them soon, and then they just all went. And I absolutely flipped my nut. I was on holiday as well. I was on holiday in an airport. And I was like in the hotel just before we were getting on the plane. And I was like, what the? James like, what's the matter? What's the matter? Has something bad happened? And I was like, yes, something terrible's happened. So then I paid an extortionate amount, probably third, if not twice, some of the units costs to try and get my hands on them. But I did in the end.
The good news is that in the last article that they released about Warhammer The Old World, they said that you'll be able to use your pre-existing armies. So that's something to look forward to with all of these models that you managed to get your hands on.
Well, yeah, I've been going around in circles with this army for about the last 2 or 3 years, because we didn't have the Lumineth Realm Lords. So I wanted an elf army, so I was like, oh, swordsman can count as this, and that can count as that. And now I'm like, well, do I really want the Swordsmaster of Hoeth models when the Lumineth have got really nice Swordsmasters models of their own? And so I'm now probably going to go back and rebase them from circular bases back onto square, so I can use them in. It's going to be on, man. If I get that army together and painted, it's going to be big.
I am in a very similar place, as you know. I've carried my 5th edition Way Watchers all the way through my hobby journey, and at the moment they're on round bases, and they are my counts as Shadow Warriors to my Cities of Sigmar. And now I'm eyeing up some square bases for them. I'll get them back on squares and get them playing this game. But yeah, what we wanted to talk about today was the lore. So we're going to have a little bit of chat about the High Elf lore, what we know about what's going on for the High Elves in the timeline for the game at the Old World, and just have a look at. They have been mentioned in one article, in the Bretonian article. There are some icons for them on the maps there, so we're going to talk about that, and then just say what we really would like to see from them. So, just going through the different books and resources that we've got. I mean, Ben, you've got the books all the way going back to 4th edition on your shelf.
No, 3rd edition. The original Warhammer Armies book, with the High Elf Alley contingent.
Nice. So we've been scouring through that, and we've worked out that the Phoenix King is still Finnabar, who was
we normally got it
King.
Catastrophically wrong, nearly 1,000 years out.
But we managed to work out that it's still the same old Phoenix King that we remember from the game, which is something good about being long-lived. It's something that I spoke about with Luke when I did the Wood Elf episode, is that a lot of the characters and units that you remember will still be there, and they won't have changed all that much, and there's going to be something really nicely familiar about it, even though the setting will be different and new, or old, should I say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could safely say that there is no there is no high elf character that they released that was not alive at the time that they're planning to do the old world. So that's going to be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a big part of me that's secretly very hopeful about this whole project because I mean, imagine a new Eltharion the Grim on a Griffin, or a new Tyrion, or a new Teclis, or a new what's the name of the chappie who's the White Lions guy?
Corhill.
Corhill, that's the badger.
Yeah.
So imagine all those in plastic with all of their new, like the way they go about design. I mean, I'm just at the moment painting up a Nighthawk army, and it still amazes me how like weightless they can make a model look now. You know. So yeah, I think we're going to see them all. Hopefully we're going to see them all back.
And I think we will touch on a few of them as we go along. But we're going to start with Bar the Seafarer, as he is known. Bar is a character from the Old World who I really love, to be honest. I think what was great about him is that he wasn't an isolationist like a lot of the High Elves were, where they wanted to stay sort of in their island and just be a dying race on their own. He actually reached out to the world, and he went. That's why he's called the Seafarer, and he went and visited the Old World, specifically parts of the map that we've seen, and he reached out to the Empire and to the Wood Elves, Bretonnians, and even the dwarves, believe it or not. And it's great to see the High Elf influence come back. And what was interesting about that is as we begin to approach the war against chaos, actually the elves under Bar, although they are still going to be haughty and arrogant and everything that they are, they're actually useful and guiding. And Teclis comes over, for example, towards the end of the century and helps to set up the colleges of magic for the Empire to help them fight against chaos, which is really interesting that they would actually, under his rulership, begin to share these things.
Yeah. I think that's one of my favorite parts of their background is Teclis coming over and teaching the humans how to magic. And it went wrong from there. That's a great little piece, and I've always liked Bar because there's bits of the High Elf background that I just always used to feel really sad reading about, like the War of the Beard. I just like it crushed two species that needed to be strong, who had much better enemies to be fighting than spending the best part of 1,000 years kicking the snot out of each other.
Yeah.
And it just makes me sad. So Bar is kind of like he's the new hope, isn't he? He's like bringing the elves into the future, and without really knowing that, in fact, it's kind of the last hurrah, which I think is quite sad when you look at back in retrospect. When I used to play it, I used to feel like the elves were on the ascendant, that that there was a chance that the dark elves and the elves would sort of reconcile a little bit, or especially the wood elves and the high elves, and that we'd start to spread across the world, and as in the Games Workshop would explore other parts of the world, and we'd have a dynamic forward-moving thing. But the more I look back at that now, it could never really happen, because every war against chaos was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the good races were only just surviving. So it's, I suppose, inevitable, but you kind of just don't want it to happen to you when you're watching. You're like,
it's a really interesting thing to say, actually, Ben, that I'd never really thought about. Everything Bar was trying to do, and actually its ultimate futility, and them not having a clue about it. That's really a really interesting point. But some of the stuff that you said there about strengthening of ties between the different elven races, that's something that we do see between the High Elves and the Wood Elves. There is a point where Araloth travels through the realm routes and it pops up in a forest, just with some eternal guard, I think, and aids the high elves for nobody really knows the reason why, and then pops back sort of without saying anything about it. And there's a time really, really close to what's going on at the moment. So in Bretonnia at the moment, Morga has been reborn, who is like a beast man legend of old, who's like called the Corruptor, and he fights a war with the Wood Elves, but it all kind of ends with him dying, but the Beastmen overrunning Athel Loren, and it becomes winter and the forest is unable to defend itself. It's just down to the elves, but there actually aren't enough Wood Elves, and a contingent of High Elves are sent from Ulthuan to basically stop the Wood Elves from being completely overrun. And without that help, they would have just perished as a race, and there would be no more Wood Elves.
Yeah, it's a cool story, isn't it? You also get that wonderful moment right at the end where was he called Malekith at the time, or was he the new name they have for him anyway?
Malekith. Yeah,
Malekith ends up becoming the Phoenix King because Finnebar dies, and his guard is made up of Phoenix Guard and Blackguard. And it turns out, unbeknownst to anybody, that when those two units mixed, all hell breaks loose. They are like the coming of Miniature Kane himself, which I absolutely loved. The calm stoicism of the Phoenix Guard mixed with the savagery of the Blackguard was just as good as it got. And I've actually always wanted to do a mixed unit of the two, which I might still do, because I just think it's a really cool moment.
Yeah, there was that. There was a lot of that going on in the old world. The kind of equal and opposite units paralleled throughout a lot of the elven races. And the books were written. I really liked the way the 8th edition books are written, because they are all written by Matt Ward, and what he did was he kind of carried the template from, I think he did I can't remember which book he did first, but all 3 books carried this kind of template where they were similar but then also quite different at the same time, which was an interesting thing to see.
Well, the Dark Elves always really were, there was always a unit. If there was a unit for the High Elves, there was a unit for the Dark Elves. It always used to aggravate me that their archers got basically extra shot for nothing, and they were cheaper. It was just,
but they couldn't shoot in they couldn't shoot in an extra rank, Ben.
And still cheap.
Do you think there was a little bit of like the Dark Elves always had their spies, and you assume that the High Elves would always have their spies, and they'd be like reporting back to the Phoenix King to his court and be like, they've got a new unit. Like, right, get me the generals.
Yeah, when they reported on the Witch Elves, it was probably a bit like, they do what? they wear what? Yeah.
So I can't get over that thought. So they have shown High Elves in one of the articles, and they've got in the Warhammer community article called The Old World, Your First Look at the Map of Bretonnia, there are High Elf enclaves. And I'm just going to read word for word the flavor text that it gives about them, and then we can have a bit of a thought about that. So it says, the High Elves of Ulthuan were once the undisputed rulers of the seas, maintaining a trade network of colonies and glittering port cities on every continent, from the Tower of the Rising Sun in the east to the Citadel of Dusk in the west. The coast of Bretonnia was no exception, and the map features no fewer than 4 such enclaves. Tor Soleil sits to the northwest coastline, while Tor Beduze can be found to the southwest, just north of the city of Brion. Meanwhile, Tor Motel and the Silent Isle can be found on islands just off Bretonnia's west coasts. High Elves shouldn't be strangers in these lands, really, I think, because Finnebar has already reached out there. Obviously, will still be trade. We know that the High Elves are trading at least with the Empire, because the Empire have found their way to Ulthuan now. Their sailing ships have gotten good enough. They weren't really let anywhere past, oh goodness me, where did they not let them pass? Lothan, yeah. So they let the High Elves they let the Empire stop at Lothan and no further, but there is some trade back and forth. So I think it would be cool to see, like you said, you already talked about models such as the Sky Cutter and the Sea Guard and the Sea Helm, and those are the ones that I guess that we will see on these enclaves on the coastal regions of Bretonnia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to go right back to the start now. So one of the units, and there is only 7 in the original list, is called the Merchant Companies, which is where the Lothan Sea Guard come from. And its description is that these regiments are raised by merchant princes and are uniquely armed, half as spearmen or halberdiers and the other half as archers. So whether they go back to them calling them merchant companies or they're called Sea Guard, I think you're right. I think it would be cool to see. I mean, we can speculate about this, like what models they're going to come out, but it would be cool to see, like, those people, those folk that are living away from Ulthuan and have models and background and books with like heraldry and all that stuff. It's very exciting, isn't it?
I would and wouldn't love to see Sea Guard come back, because I've just got memories of playing against Dan's High Elf army, and the Sea Guard, they're just it's unfair, isn't it, how good they are, because they fight in an additional rank because of their spear, and then they fight in an additional rank on top of that because they're High Elves, and they always strike first, and they shoot with their bows in an additional rank as well. They're just absolutely phenomenal. They're going to stand and shoot against you and then lay down their spears. They might as well, be pikes with the range that they've got on them for being High Elves. They were a really cool unit, I suppose.
But I that's one of the things that piece of background, that rule that represents the background, is one of the things I love about the Elves. And one of the things that aggravates me so much about the Empire is that fighting in a shield wall is all about fighting in 2 ranks and a minimum of 2 ranks. For me, the humans should have been phalanxes of pike, so you could get as many warriors in combat as they could, so they could overwhelm whatever they were fighting at with multiple spears. But the elf background, I think the reason why they didn't do that is because it allowed you to have the elves fighting in an extra rank, because it made the elves look even more impressive, and you can imagine them like cycling their front rank and moving in a kind of uniform way, so that they're always defending each other, and they're always, I love it. I love that kind of that thing on the battlefield where I used to love doing it, where people are like, you get how many attacks? Like, yeah, I do. Yeah, I love it.
I think for me, the play style of the Elves that really represents them the most or the best was the always strikes first rule. And I'm going back to that scene in Lord of the Rings where the elves, the scene I'm talking about, where all the elves are stood with their
Do I know the scene? Do I know the scene? If I watched Lord of the Rings, I've watched that bit 5 times before the film's allowed to continue.
It's just great. As the charge comes in, they're just stood, like you said, they've got their sort of discipline and their stoicism. And just as the enemy approaches them, it just, before they can do anything, they've like struck the first rank just completely dead.
Yeah.
And that's what I always used to think about, especially sword masters, the way they hold their swords are the same.
I never remember the book that I read this in, but it stays in my mind as one of like the epitomes of elfness. And there's some negotiation going on, and there's an elf chappie and some swords masters, and there's a empire chappie and some great swords. And one of the great swords makes the mistake of reaching for his sword, and before his hand has barely even touched his sword, one of the swords masters has drawn his sword, cut his head off, and resheathed it. And I'm like, there you go. It's like, I'm sorry, what were you doing? Like, let's continue with the negotiation and stop touching your sword. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. But for me, that and do you remember the Mark of Chaos
Yeah,
computer game video where the
yeah, yeah.
Shadow Warrior shows up and just wrecks face, not by being strong, but by putting like its dagger in the eye slot and like cutting out the hamstrings and just moving between them like fluid. It's just those two things for me always strikes first. You better be wearing good armor because
Yeah, I think that's something that I'd really like to see represented on the tabletop again, and I'm sure they'll maintain that. They said they're looking through all previous editions and picking and choosing what they like the most and adding to it with mechanics that they think will work, on top of that to give us something new. But going back to the lore, in this current time frame where everything is set, obviously before the Great War against Chaos, and this is kind of before even Bretonia is kind of a whole nation, because it's still being overrun by orcs and things. It's not quite solidified as it is, and it's only a few hundred years since the High Elves even know the Wood Elves exist and things like this. What would you like to see explored in the lore in this world from a High Elf perspective?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'd like to, and I don't think this will come out in the army books, but I think I'd like to have stories about them watching the humans develop into nations, because the reality is they've been around for like centuries, thousands of years, and the humans have just been crawling around in mud huts. They've been fighting amongst each other, and you can almost imagine them coming over and being like the Vulcans, like, if they don't sleep with each other yet, no, we'll come back in 1,000 years. It's a kind of bother to deal with them.
You're right. It must seem a blink of an eye for them that the Bretonians were just horseman tribes rather than a nation getting themselves together.
So I think I'd love to see their kind of them watching, the politicking, them helping, maybe, like, you can almost imagine the Silver Helms teaching the Bretonians how to couch a lance, for example. Because they've been doing it for thousands of years, so they kind of know how to do it. And also, going back to the War of the Beard, there's such a massive amount of animosity between those two races that although Finnebar's come along and they haven't killed each other outright, the first conversation, there's still a lot to get over. And it's the first time the elves are going to be back in force, or looking outside of their walls, and cool to see the interaction between the dwarves and the elves.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I think obviously it's still going to be uneasy, but there might be a situation where they're forced together, I suppose.
Yeah, out of desperation, I think, because the High Elves would have no idea the strength of the dwarves, and the dwarves would have no idea of the strength of the elves, and the situation really is quite dire for both of them, to be honest. And I can't really ever remember reading about that reality hitting home. When the dwarves realize, or the elves realize, that the dwarves are, sort of a shell of what they used to be. Those massive citadels populated by maybe 10% of what they used to be. And the dwarves realizing that those expeditionary forces aren't like a surplus of warriors not knowing what to do and leaving Ulthuan because they've just got so many of them there. They're actually like kind of the elves' last hope, really. They're, like we said before, like their last kind of attempt to unite the races of good. All those with a relatively good purpose compared to chaos. So yeah, I think I'd quite like to see that.
Yeah, I'd love to see that, as you said, from a lore perspective. I'd like to see also from a lore perspective just some interaction with the Dark Elves, and just even if it's something like a spy or an assassin or someone who is in one of these enclaves that they've got, is there going to be a a dark elf assassin in there somewhere. There's always going to be ones lurking, and I always liked that idea of them having their rivalry, and I'd like to see that come back. And I know Jeremy would, who's been on the show a couple of times. He loved all that sort of stuff. I'd also like to see a bit of an interaction between them and the goblins. And we know that Finnabar, he's got a rivalry with Grom the Paunch going on, and things like that. And they've been fighting wars out between each other, and there's been different kinds of incursions. And like you said, although Ulthuan is reaching out, it's still under constant threat of invasion from dark elves and goblins and chaos and all these other forces. And it's a very fragile balance that they've got to try and maintain between keeping hold of what they've got and being able to reach out. And I think that's a balance that I'd like to see how they tread it, and in a bit more detail than we've seen before.
Well, politically, it makes perfect sense if you think about it, because if you strengthen the Empire and the Bretonnians and the Dwarves and become on better terms with the Dark Elves, you create a buffer between the Wastes and yourself. So like the Norse raids would get intercepted by Empire fleets, for example, before they got to Ulthuan. It makes political sense as well as just being a nice thing to do.
I suppose they must be quite consciously aware of the fact that they're a dying race now. I think they've known for about 1,000 years at this point that their numbers are diminishing, and that's probably another reason for it. So I guess they, like you said, they become the guiders and the influencers and the helpers to these young races, and that interaction's got to be something that we've got to see.
Well, I always find this frustrating. I always found this frustrating in Lord of the Rings, like dying race. Why? There are reasons. You're 1,000 years old. Why haven't you got like 600 children? What's going on? Why are they a dying race? It makes very little sense why Elrond has only got 3 kids. Why have you only got 3 kids? Like, what's going on? It's not something Tolkien ever explored, and I think as a result, it's not something that Games Workshop ever explored. And really, Games Workshop took a lot of their cues from about the High Elves, from Lord of the Rings. I mean, Ulthuan is effectively the Undying Lands, if we're being honest.
So what I'm hearing, Ben, from you is that the setting of the game is in the wrong era, and what they should do is they should go back, and we should have no Empire and no Bretonnia, and we should just have, as you said, men in mud huts, and we should have the absolute glory of the High Elf Empire and just watch them in their heyday versus
kicking the snot out of chaos, setting up the ward that protects the world forever, right up until the end. It's one of the best bits of the background that people. I love talking to people about this when I was working in Games Workshop, because no one ever knew it. No one ever realised that, like, in the middle of Ulthuan is like a circle of mages who, basically in stasis, like forever, protecting, the world from chaos magic going absolutely apeshit. And the whole world. One of the flaws of one of the great things about the elves is that they really are flawed. Is they struggle to have a conversation with a human without coming across as an arrogant ass. But in some ways, they've got a right to be. When a swords master of Hoeth is having a conversation with a greatsword, and the greatsword's like, "Oh, I'm pretty good," and the sword master is like, "Sure, yeah, okay." Been doing this for like 3,000 years, but sure, okay. There's this thing always going to be back in the back of the elven mind that you're here because of the sacrifice that our greatest magicians or mages made, and you're still here because of that. And if we were to just turn that off, it would all go to pot, and no one else is aware. Really, I can't think of any moment where like the humans suddenly realise the sacrifice the elves made. and go, "Oh, thank you." It's like
Yeah.
because it kind of underpins their entire attitude to the rest of the world, which is like this elven concept that effectively the world owes them and never gives them anything back ever. Like, they just end up giving and giving and giving until it's the last thing that they do, and it goes back to like the nobility of them, that you can. It's why in some ways, or it's why in many ways, I tolerated them far more than I tolerated Eldar. That arrogance of Eldar aggravates me immensely, because they made a chaos god. They've done nothing, literally nothing, to stop the overrun of chaos, other than to sort of pout about it after they made the biggest boo-boo ever. And in Warhammer Fantasy, yes, Slanesh was still created in some way, I think, by Elven excess, but they kind of learned from it, and they made it. They made amends for it. They gave everything to stop it, and they've, it's brilliant. It's kind of the great redemption arc, and then they spend the rest of ever sort of living with this kind of this thing in the back of their mind that comes out over and over again, defines them as a race completely.
Yeah, I think another thing, I mean, we could go on and talk forever about this topic, but just kind of the more you talk, the kind of inspires me to talk. And I was just thinking about the Phoenix Guard and about how they fight right up until the end times, and the thing you're saying about, how they do everything and they give everything, even if it isn't going to go their way and the world is going to end anyway. The Phoenix Guard must have known what was going to happen, because they're witness to destiny, and they would have seen the end times unfolding, in their mind's eye very vividly, and still gave everything to fight until the end.
Well, it's one of my favorite pieces of Norse mythology is the Ragnarok. And the thing I like about it the most is that all of the gods know their role. They know what's going to happen to them. Odin has told them. Odin has told Thor that you are going to die fighting Jormungandr, and yet he does. He does it. He doesn't hesitate to do it, because that's his destiny. He knows it's his destiny. He's the one who, defeats Fenris Wolf and Jormungandr. So, there it is. And the Finnish Guard are the same. They know exactly how they're going to die, and they don't care much what. They've made that decision that they are going to do their duty right up until the point where they can't do it anymore. And it goes back to what I said as my original reason why I fell in love with them is that this concept that when an elf in Warhammer risks their life, they're risking thousands of years. They're giving up more than we could ever comprehend, really. It's difficult to comprehend. I mean, we get really upset about the idea of losing 40 years or 10 years, but for them, they're giving up eternity, effectively. And the Phoenix Guard epitomised that, although I never really liked the Phoenix Guard when I was younger. Don't know why.
I could see you as a Swordmaster boy.
I was a Swordmaster boy, yeah.
Yeah, twanging those arrows out the air.
Yeah, it was a piece of art by Mark Gibbons with the Swordsmaster just standing there with the sword. I was like, yeah, so good, yeah.
And I think, actually, going back to what you were saying, Ben, that's why it's such a crying shame and so frustrating when you're playing a game and something like a Skaven slave will come and skewer an elf and kill it. And you just think, no, like, it's, if you're invested in the army in the way that we both are with our own elf armies, it is quite frustrating when they don't do what they should do, and you think, it is a tragedy every single time. One of them dies, and as you said, it's another nail in the coffin for that dying race. It's another elf that you won't ever get back. So, yeah, I think that pretty much rounds us out. That's for the top chat about the High Elf lore today. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining and sharing your thoughts and ideas. And actually, it went much deeper than I thought it was going to go. It was really, really, really interesting, and just a great chat. So,
no, it was loved it.
if you'd like to hear more of Ben's insights, do go and check out his wonderful podcast, the Two Ps Podcast. It is a hobby podcast that covers just about everything, really. You do really great hobby tips on the hobby desk, and they talk about the Mortal Realms, and they have been talking about the Old World of late, and 40k and other games and local events. And as you can see from this, Ben's insights are just fantastic. And there's also another guy on the podcast who chips in now and again.
The Cornish one. Yeah. People get confused because I'm the one from Cornwall, but he sounds more Cornish, so they're like, "Yes, you're always mixed up."
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Ben, and thank you everyone who watched, and thank you especially to everybody who made it this far through our ramblings. And Ben is going to join us again to talk about our favorite high elf units from old, who we'd like to see brought back into the game. So be sure to check that out next time. See ya.
See you later, guys.